Welcome everyone, Carstein here with a discussion about some of the best starting positions in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires for various legendary lords. Now this is not about the lords themselves, their races, their skill line or anything like that. This is just about the start position, the initial province so to speak, the enemies that they have to deal with nearby as well. What makes a good start position? It's having resources in the province. It's ideally having a province with 3-4 regions in it with landmarks or resources that you can use. It's also having a defensible province as well, because you don't want to end up being flanked by enemies in your campaign. Or a position where you might be surrounded, but you can deal with enemies that surround you very quickly and then fortify your position and make it very defensible. So at number 5, we have Sylvania. And when we think about Sylvania, we think of southern Sylvania and northern Sylvania. Now, Sylvania is in the eastern part of the empire. Now, the imperial factions are a minor threat at best. Pretty pathetic overall as factions. And because of that particular situation, it's fairly easy to defend Sylvania from the north, from the west. Sure, you do have Draika, you do have Azag, those are problems, but overall the position is secure and your expansion path, if you're playing as Vlad von Carstein or Isabella von Carstein, is pretty straightforward in more ways than one. But what about the dwarves, you might ask? Well, if you're playing as Vlad, the diplomatic, you can actually achieve a good diplomatic result at Ungram because he and Zufbar just don't get along. You can take Zufbar, sell it to Ungram, and he'll protect your entire eastern flank, allowing you to focus on the other issues in your campaign. On top of that, Castle Drakenhof is an amazing settlement because it has 2 landmarks for the vampire counts and also has a gold mine. So you'll be generating quite a bit of money from this particular settlement. And once you secure the mountains to the east, you will be in a fairly entrenched position over here from which enemies will not so easily throw you out. And there is the advantage. Unless you get the dwarf endgame crisis or the greenskin endgame crisis with Azag, very unlikely that you're going to encounter many threats towards Sylvania past the early game. And that's an important thing, like having a secure heartland for your empire is pretty important in any particular campaign. It's one of the advantages Vlad has for all the issues his campaign might have. I mean, there is a great deal of power with the vampire counts, but there's also certainly issues. Still one of the best factions in the game by far, between their economy, their control of territory, their raised den mechanic. The vampire counts are certainly a really good faction. And in fact, dealing with Sylvania is one of the more difficult things to deal with in a campaign as, say, Balthazar Gelt or Karl Franz. Now, I wish I could say the Reichland is a good starting position, but it's not. You do have Helmgard to protect the west, and the mountains, of course, form a barrier as well. That's all well and good, but the problem is Eilhart and Grimgor are pretty vulnerable as settlements from factions that might attack you. Actually, all of the minor settlements there. Whereas if you look at Sylvania, yeah, armies can attack you, but here's the thing. They have to cross the bridge here at the moot, or swim across, which obviously will slow them down. And so you're funneling enemies into choke points, so to speak, over here. Like, your most vulnerable, the most vulnerable you are is from the gap right here, so right here, or from the north. Though there is a bridge, bear in mind, but you are vulnerable from the mountains, but you can deal with the factions from. You can make a deal with Ungram. He doesn't particularly like you, but it is quite very possible to get a really good alliance with Ungram or even a vassalization agreement, and he'll do a lot to protect your flanks. So that makes this a really solid starting position for any faction. And number 4, there is the Land of Assassins. Arkhan the Black certainly has a lot of advantages in his campaign, like between getting an extra army right off the bat as the Tomb Kings, getting a lot of unit recruitment early on that helps boost his armies in a significant fashion. He does have a great deal of power. But one of the most powerful things Arkhan has is the province he starts with, because he will gain control over this entire province from the very beginning. So this is an amazing starting position that he goes with. The Land of Assassins is one of the most defensible locations in the game, because while the ports are vulnerable, there's no nearby faction that can attack you via the sea. Like, they have to travel a fair amount of distance, even though they has a tendency to travel large distances to attack port settlements. The distance alone, as well as the vision you have over here, means that it is fairly easy to defend, and you can gain a lot through just controlling the Land of Assassins. But on top of that, Arkhan's starting position over here has a lot more going for it than just that. You also have Kofar over here and the mountains here. You can make a deal with the dwarves. You can capture the Great Desert of Araby. And having such a strong and powerful defensive location from the very beginning of your campaign gives you a lot of power during the course of that campaign. This is also something that applies to Rapans. Both Rapans and Arkhan benefit from the Land of Assassins as well as the coast of Araby, and of course the Atalan Mountains. Camry in general is a nightmare to start in, but the fact that they start on the western coast of it, or on the coast of Araby, does help protect them from many other threats that they're going to face in a campaign. And I would say Rapans is probably the most powerful of the legendary lords of Bretonnia, because she also starts close enough to Arkhan. So it's both of them that benefit greatly from the situation over here on the coast of Araby. It's safe, it's secure, it's got good settlements. Yes, having ports obviously limits the potential here. Having ports, because like if for the Tomb Kings, ports will give you growth, but obviously you would want the extra building slots that you would have from a regular settlement. But just the protection alone gives you quite a lot to work with during your campaign. And chances are, once you leave this place with your armies, you're not going to come back here. You're never going to be in a position where you're going to have to defend this, the Land of Assassins. Potentially the coast of Araby can be attacked, especially by Sartosa if you're playing Rapans, but for the most part, fairly safe, secure location with a lot of potential going for it. At number 3, we have Grimgor Ironhide starting position in the Eagle Eyries in Gash Kadrak. Now, Gash Kadrak is an amazing province. It has the gemstones resource. It also has the landmark for greenskins that give you the big fort. So the Black Orc and Big Guns benefit recruitment rank, recruitment duration. Okay, so it's a great province that has a lot on offer. Now, Grimgor starts in the Eagle Eyries, which is a tier 2 settlement. Now, sometimes for certain races, starting with a minor settlement can be a downside. For instance, or starting with more than one settlement, like Zaytan starts with 2 settlements over here in the Stoneski foothills, but he only starts with the tier 1 provincial capital, which actually hurts him quite a bit in his campaign, because Astragoth and Drazov start with tier 2 provincial capitals, even if they have to conquer their initial province on their own. So yeah, Zaytan does have quite a few issues in his campaign because of that. Now, for the greenskins, it's quite the opposite. Starting with a minor settlement at a higher tier is a major benefit, because you'll get the tier 2 barracks very, very quickly, and then you get troll recruitment as well very, very quickly. Within 3 turns, you'll be recruiting trolls and a lot of nasty skulkers. So Grimgor, like, one of the things that has made Grimgor such an unstoppable abomination on the campaign map is actually just his starting position, the starting province he has, where he can generate a lot of income. And while it's not necessarily the easiest to defend, no one's really going to march all the way through the Plain of Zar, which is held by Gorth the Cruel, to attack you over here in the Eagle Eyries. Not easily, anyway. Well, the Chaos Dwarves might, but Astragoth might not be willing to travel that distance for territory he doesn't hold. That's one of the things to know about the AI. They're not necessarily willing to do that so easily. They may do it if they have overwhelming force, but not normally. So that actually offers Grimgor quite a lot of protection. And also these settlements over here, with the exception of Black Fang, like these 3 settlements here are very close to each other, and the greenskins can use the Underway. So defending this territory is actually pretty easy for Grimgor. You can't... Invading Grimgor is always a nightmare for this reason, because he can easily recruit an army from any one of these 3 settlements. And let's say you take the Gorge of Rock, if you're coming in as Kolek, well, if he has an army in the Eagle Eyries, he's going to march it against you next turn, or very, very close to you. So you're going to be under a lot of pressure and under constant harassment if you're having to do this. This is what defines a good starting position. And of course, you're very close to Gorf the Cruel, and you can take Zarnagrun very quickly and get to high-level settlement. Like, granted, Grimgor isn't the only one. Astrogoth, of course, is. Kolek is. Other factions are relatively close to Zarnagrun, but Grimgor, of course, is the only one who can do it in a non-cheesy way, because he can recruit so many units to overwhelm the defenders over here in Zarnagrun. But starting location-wide, Gash Kadrak, where it's situated on the campaign map and how many regions it has and how defensive it is, even if it's got a lot of attack, it's got a lot of possibilities for an invading army to attack you from, it's still a great province. And on top of that, most of the factions that initially border are minor factions. Like Kolek obviously borders you if you're playing as Grimgor, and so does Zaytan. But the chances of Zaytan actually attacking you are not really that high. The reason behind that is Zaytan has got other issues. He's going to end up likely in a war. He's going to end up in a war with Cafe. He may end up in a war with Village. He's at war with the Warriors of Chaos over here of Lothar in Bloodwind Keep. And hell, Kolek and Zaytan, while they aren't hostile towards one another, they don't necessarily get on in the best possible fashion. So Grimgor, so it's not like Gash Kadrak is just an amazing province because of the settlements themselves. It's also the factions that surround Gash Kadrak and their situation. Like this Greenskin faction is going to be wiped out by Kolek. The Saberskin are going to be wiped out. And all the ogres over here in the northern part of the mountains of Morn, they're not going to be able to stand up to any faction. So if you're invading as Grimgor from the north, you can easily wipe these guys out and take their territory. And no one's really going to be able to stop you until you encounter Greasus. And yeah, shockingly enough, when you can capture that much territory and easily defend it, Greasus is not going to be able to stand up to you. This is one of the primary reasons why Grimgor is such an overwhelming powerhouse. You could put a lot of legendary lords. If they could use the Underway, you could put a lot of legendary lords in this position, and they do amazingly well in their own way. Now, Grimgor is, of course, very strong in his own right. He's a strong duelist. He's very difficult to take down. He has good faction benefits on a good lord scale, so obviously that all benefits him. But it's really the star position that makes him such an overwhelming threat that he has turned into. This is why he's the strongest legendary lord in the game. Positioning matters. And number 2, we have Albion. Great Britain, and like Great Britain in real life, it is an absolute nightmare to attack and easy enough to defend. How is that? Well, let's look at Albion. It only has one port over here in the Isle of Wights. So because of that specific situation, an attacker either loses all their movement points when they're landing here, or they have to try and land here and win the battle over here, and then any army, like you can traverse Albion very, very quickly. Like it's 3 settlements very close to one another, and that confers an enormous defensive advantage to anyone that controls it. It's hard enough to take down. I've played campaigns against Be'lakor, and it was always a nightmare to have to deal with him just because of how long it can take you to even get to Albion. As any faction in this nearby vicinity, it can take you a couple of turns. Then when you're landing, you're going to be very exposed to a defender's armies that are going to rush to try and take you down. And of course, there is the chaos corruption that Be'lakor does have, which obviously hurts any particular attacker. So it's a natural fortress in the world of Total War Warhammer 3. It's one of the main benefits in Be'lakor's campaign. But on top of that, Albion it has links to a lot of different regions. Like you can go in Nagron to the west, you can go in Bretonia to the south, you can go in Norsca to the east, you can go in the northern Castways to the north. And you can go to Ulfwan in the southwest as well. So from this province, you can strike across a vast array of territorial types. Like Be'lakor would still be a world traveler, even if he didn't have his portal mechanic, just because of where he starts his campaign. And that is obviously a major advantage in this campaign. Like Be'lakor is... like Arkhan is stronger as a legendary lord in the late game, but early game Be'lakor is hands down the strongest legendary lord of the Warriors of Chaos, because the Warriors of Chaos are already formidable enough on the defense with their Dark Fortresses. But look at Be'lakor's situation. He will get 2 vassals from the first few turns of his campaign very, very quickly that will defend this island fortress. He doesn't even need to worry about anyone landing here, because no one will. And even if they do, they're going to be wiped out with extreme prejudice by the 2 factions that you're going to have as vassals. This position on the campaign map, the way Albion is structured, is what makes Be'lakor so incredibly annoying to deal with it in any campaign for any legendary lord that borders him, because you know Be'lakor is going to declare war on you, and you know taking him out is going to be an absolute nightmare just because of the way the island is designed, the distance you have to cover to get there, what landing there actually involves as a process. So it really isn't a pleasant place for any particular attacker to take down. And obviously, it does have quite a few benefits in its own right. In terms of like free regions, very close together, quite a lot of potential benefits from this province. Finally, and number 1, it is Etain, Lothern in Ulthuan that Tyrion starts with. And this starting position is what makes Tyrion such a dominant legendary lord. I mean, he's very strong as a duelist, he has good faction benefits, he has a good skill line, but his starting position alone makes him incredibly good in itself. You could put a much weaker legendary lord in this position, and they'd still do very, very well. That's because there's only 1 minor Dark Elven faction to deal with over here, and they'll as a minor faction, they'll be pretty easy to take down, and then Tyrion obviously has good diplomatic relations with other High Elves, so you're not going to have to fight other High Elven factions. Well, Safri is obviously the exception. And so you get a province with 2 landmarks over here. Well, 3 landmarks, really, if you're looking at that, because the the gates of Lothern also are a landmark. They're a special port that give significant benefits in terms of like trade resources, income. And then, of course, you have the Sacred Flame of Asuryan over here as well. When you look at this province and the economic benefits it provides is pretty significant. And it's also very, very easy to defend as well at the same time, because the territory that an invader would have to deal with first, assuming they're invading via the sea, because invading from the north, yeah, that's complicated. There's the gates over there to the north. So anyone invading from the south would have to bypass Lothern. And the AI is not so willing to just bypass Lothern, expose themselves by attacking, say, this port region. And even if they do, they're going to be easy targets for all your armies that are going to converge on that point and wipe them out. So so very strong defensive situation. Albion is obviously better. But the economic potential of the starting position is very significant, having to deal with minor enemies, and really having the ability in a campaign to dictate the course of that campaign from the very start. That's what makes Tyrion so very, very good, because you wipe out these Dark Elves, then you take down Safri, then you just go deal with Noctilus, Calador, and maybe the Greenskins over here that are wiped out, and then engage in diplomacy to confederate Elfarion and Alariol eventually and take all of Ulthuan under your control. And, of course, stabilize the situation and get the major economy going. Obviously, the benefit of the starting position is having a bunch of friendly neighbors as well, and the factions that are hostile towards you. Well, look at the factions that are hostile. The Dark Elves over here, the Greenskins, Noctilus. Noctilus is pretty pathetic against the High Elves. A very basic High Elven army will tear his own army to shreds, because his army is very low armor, very vulnerable to range units, to the long-range missile units that the High Elves do use. So you have an incredibly good starting position, good defenses, good economic potential, and weak enemies to deal with. It's really as close to the perfect starting position as you can get in Total War Warhammer 3. And Tyrion has always become a strong faction, most of the time, unless, a combination of events, of very bad events happen where the High Elves lose. But most of the time in Warhammer 3 at the moment, we do see the High Elf dominance. But that's not because Alariol and Elfarion do well. That's because Tyrion, due to the nature of his starting province, his starting position, does very well in every campaign. Sure, he may lose occasionally. It does happen. Sure, but it's like 95%. He has a 95% chance of success, which makes it an absolute nightmare to invade Ulf-1 because you're going to be dealing with the golden trio of Tyrion, Alariel, and Elfarion on this island once they wipe out Nakari. Usually they do end up doing that. Like, Nakari is the only threat for any Ulf-1 faction in a campaign because, well, Nakari is an absolute nightmare to play. Defeating Nakari on an open field is a pretty brutal challenge just because of the devastating flanker effect and what Nakari can do in a battle in terms of melee potential. Really, really fast Legendary Lord, though, so that makes it difficult to kill Nakari with pure range units. But Nakari is the only challenge. And then, of course, you get the annoying harasser that is Be'lakor, but Be'lakor isn't a genuine threat to you. He's just, like, preventing you from developing the northern parts of Ulf-1. That's really all that Be'lakor accomplishes in a campaign. He's just kind of trolling everyone that he borders. And that's all there is to say. Carstein signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.